We are back. We're back on how to make absolutely great, amazing, fantastic D&D, and we couldn't be in better company today because I mean we're in the company of Ed Greenwood, and I'm not going to introduce you because seriously and honestly, I don't think you do need an introduction anymore. I mean, you are kind of like the god of the Forgotten Realms. So
Yeah, it's a full-time job and then some. Yeah.
so,
Yes.
so that's going to be so. Hi, Chris. How you doing, mate?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm all right. Just so you know, so I can say it in public, and I'm sure that they won't mind. But I thrashed Mel and Betsy at Carcassonne.
In Carcassonne?
Yes.
In Carcassonne.
Talking about cities, we've been playing a game about building cities, and boom, I won. Being very dirty, but I did win. So that rocks. So I thought it would be a nice segue because today we are going to talk about how to make actually great cities in Dungeons and Dragons. So, Chris, would you like to take this on? Because you are the one who thought, it would be amazing for this. I thought, well, it would be amazing for pretty much anything that's to do with D&D. But you thought about cities.
True.
So please, take it away.
Well, I thought that would be great because Ed is one of the creator of one of the greatest and most storied cities in D&D history, and that's Waterdeep, right? So Waterdeep is the city that probably everybody who plays D&D knows about. I mean, some people, the younger generation might have moved over to Neverwinter slightly, but things like Dragon Heist in 5e D&D and stuff bound to bring them back to Waterdeep. So I just wanted to hear what Ed had to say about making cities for games and D&D in particular. And then I thought we'd end up with a pretty lively discussion based on that stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so Ed, now that you are firmly under the spotlight, for you, what
it's Elminster.
What is the first step that you take when you decide, I am going to create a city, a town, a hamlet, or anything for Dungeons and Dragons? What are the things that you say, I need to have this in particular?
Well, whether it's for a short story or bit of fiction, or whether it's for the gaming table, the first thing that comes to mind is, and you set it up yourself when you were talking about Carcassonne and playing dirty. Cities are dirty places unless someone cleans them up. So I start with, how does it look and feel? What strikes the eye? What's the architecture? Are the streets mud? Are they cobbles? Are they corduroy? What? And how does it feel? What's the feel of living there? Are we feeling like we're in a city that's seen better days with gorgeous buildings all rising around us, but they're all in disrepair with patched roofs and so on? Or is this city expanding? Is it building? Is it crowded? Is it half empty? Are there plague chalk marks on doors and you don't go into that building or something? Things like that, the feel. And from there, I think about how it's governed. Just a quickie how it's governed, which is really more how it's policed. As in, do you have heavy patrols? Are there tax collectors? Tax collectors come often? Are there people who will come and say, I'm sorry, the Lord does not like your shutters falling into the street, and kindly do not empty your chamber pot into that cart that sits there for months, years, or whatever. And then that brings us to the next thing. Where does the water come from? Where do you buy your food if you don't grow it? And if you grow it, do you grow it outside the city walls? Far more likely than inside. Yes, there may be windows of, as George Carlin used to famously say, Toledo window box, growing stuff. But most people have to grow things outside the city or buy them from a market or a stall or vendors or peddlers with carts in the streets who do bring the food in from somewhere else. And After you've consumed the food, first of all, where do you get the water to cook from, drink? And then where do the wastes go to? Do you just throw them out in the street? Is there a night soil wagon? Are there sewers? And how is this all maintained and paid for? Which again circles back to how the place is governed. So it's really, I'm using it for a look and feel right up front, because whether it's the gaming table or it's a reader reading some fantasy fiction, it's the look and feel that's going to meet their eyes first. So I want the feel of the city, and growing inevitably out of the feel of the city is its name. How to and you, it's not just how is the thing named, but what inevitable nicknames or short names, and will those names be mocking? As in, well, there's a, for just to pick one for example, there's a famous rock song in Canada called "Venice is Sinking," which goes back to the refrain that everybody joins in on, that Venice is sinking. So is the city rising? Is it powerful? Is this the seat of power? Is it a place that everybody hates, but they have to use it or have to live there? Is it a port? Is it an important trading center? Does it have lots of heavy industry? Are things built there? Is it a city of crafters? Or is it a bookish city where you'll find lots of people who write books, collect books, sell books? What is the feel of the city? Is it dominated by the stench of its port? Or is it dominated by the stench of tanneries? Or is it dominated by the hammerings from forges everywhere and belching smoke and so on? And anybody anywhere in the real world who's lived in or near a city that has lots of industry, just to pluck an example out of thin air, years and years ago, the largest North American gaming convention was Gen Con. And for a bit of its life, it was hosted in Milwaukee. And downtown Milwaukee had the mingled smells of about 6 major breweries, a sausage factory, a chocolate factory, and all of these things mingled every day, plus a busy port and the sort of gentle stench of dead fish coming off some of the shoreline and the river and the port area. And, in general, polluted water, because in those days, factories were still allowed to dump their effluent just untreated into the water. So the smell of all that, and the old breweries downtown dumped their hops and used slurry into the sewers. So there was this wonderful smell of mildew that just inundated certain streets. And you put all those smells together, and you would step out of your hotel as a visitor and go, wow, as all this stuff hit your nose. So, I mean, and I'm sure
in August.
Yeah. But having visited many European cities where people were, in effect, far more crowded, but they'd lived together for so much longer than in North America, that all these things had been sorted out locally. And they'd made decisions as to how they were going to live. Well, maybe they didn't think about the decisions. Maybe they just sort of grew in that direction. But they'd settled on what was okay, which often meant that the king or the baron or the duke or the doge or whoever it was kicked the tanneries out of town, or other things that people really didn't like the smell of. And so you all come up together with, what does this place feel like to live in? How is it lit at night? Like, do people just lock their doors and bar them and nobody goes out because it's pitch dark? Do they have lamp lighting boys or whatever, the local equivalent? Does the city sleep at night, or is nighttime when all the delivery wagons rumble through the streets and everybody shoves a pillow over their head to try and sleep through it all? How does this city do its stuff? And I can remember visiting my grandparents in Windsor, Ontario. Windsor lies between two Great Lakes, separated from Detroit by a narrow river, which meant all night long you heard train whistles and the foghorns of ships, or ships passing each other in this narrow river who are tooting, one for port, one, two for starboard, whatever. they're signaling to each other. So you would be lying there in bed and suddenly you hear a in the distance. No, that's part of the landscape. Anybody who's ever tried to sleep in a building right beside a busy railway line knows what it's like. But people who do it are just used to it. But a newcomer, that's something like the dungeon master or the author would want to describe, because it sounds like 500 crates full of empty metal have just been thrown down the stairs. Bam, 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 crash. Oh, two knights just ran into each other. Or you're right next to the floor in a foundry and they pull stuff out of molds and then they hit stuff with hammers to try and knock the molds off. And they're used to this. You're not. Yeah, it would be something that you get used to, but it'd also be something that would make it it would be sort of a touchstone or a hallmark for describing that place, so that if you come back to it 6 years later of actual time in play and you say, remember the place where they knocked all the wooden tankards together? Oh yeah, I remember that place. Whatever it was that sticks in your players' minds, which is a handy shorthand for generating further adventures, because the way your players think about it will spur them to want to do this or that.
That is one of the most amazing intros to how to build a city. I mean, that alone should be more than enough to get pretty much anyone started. Chris, from your point of view as a writer designer, what actually do you need in a city to get started? I mean, Ed's told us, well, you need to get started with a city, but as a writer, once you have the city, what are the healthy or helpful pointers that can help you inspire the adventure or the story of whatever it is you're going to be playing at the time?
Well, what Ed was just talking about was the important aspect of describing the city and being able to describe the city, right? For me as a designer, I think that after that, so city material for D&D is setting material. And setting material is meant to inspire the dungeon master to run adventures in this setting. So one of the things that I thought Ed was going to say when he said cities are dirty places is that they have lots of problems. And those problems are things in setting material for games. The problems that the cities have, I mean, they can have the problems with, they're going to kick the tanneries out of town and stuff like that. But that's not adventure. That's background material. That's descriptive material. They need to have problems that the people playing the game or the heroes in the story solve. So to me, I mean, that's true of any setting material. So if you go to a macro level and it's a kingdom or, whatever, same thing. You're working down into the settlement level, and what dirt do the cleaners, the heroes, need to clean up? So to me, that's the primary thing. After you have established what you need to describe the city, you establish what you need to run adventures in the city.
But I can imagine, though, and probably you can chip onto this, that depends an awful lot on what kind of adventure you want to run, because the problem can come from pretty much anywhere. I mean, you can have your perfect city perfectly crafted, and then decide, okay, so the problem is going to come from the governance, or the problem is going to come of the lack of sewage, or the problem is going to be that there is an underground of criminals that are going to be doing this. Yes.
To enhance realism, there should be a mix of all of those problems.
Yeah.
Right.
Because that's what it's like in real life. I mean, you have men in back rooms saying, well, we have to go to war, but how are we going to pay for all this? And out front, you have somebody saying, look, my dress. Look at my dress. if you could clean up your threshold, there wouldn't be mud to get all over my dress like this. And then you have somebody said, "What's for dinner? What are we going to make for dinner?" And they open the larder and they say, "Well, I got a sack of salt and I got a sack of salt." Yeah. So you have little daily problems. You have frivolous problems, or problems that aren't frivolous to the people engaged in them, but to, say, adventurers. Your characters go, yeah, first world problems, what we call today. We'd say, "Oh, really? Which car shall I take to work of the 6 sitting in my driveway? Oh my!" There's that, and then there's the because you don't want it to be a, well, maybe you do, but unless you're telling almost allegory or a very epic tale of good versus evil, or maybe not good versus evil, but the Montagues and the Capulets, two houses alike. But you see, to me, the one flaw of that as a setting, as opposed to a play, it's great as a play, but the one flaw of it as a setting, it reduces the city into an armed camp divided into two sides. And the actual city was way more complex than that. And you don't want all of your fantasy cities to say, "And the 3 barons are all trying to murder the king, so which one of them can decide?" It's like, well, maybe they are, but if that's how many people do you think would come to your country if a travelogue said, "And in this place they're trying to murder the baron, but in this place the socialists have taken over and they're all trying to murder each other, and in this place," it's like I don't want to go there. Sounds like a murderous place. So there's got to be more to it than that. And if you put a big mix of them in and they bounce off each other, not only does it feel more realistic, everybody goes, "Oh, well, this may be a fantasy city, but it feels just like home." Darn it. So it feels more realistic, and it also generates more adventures because there's more things to bounce off each other. Not everything is reduced to that big conflict. But Chris is right. There's going to be all sorts of problems in any city because cities. Okay, we can say, for the sake of fantasy, this could be a Minotaur city or a Goblin city, but really underneath the dressing, it's a human city because the one species we understand, hopefully, from being is our own. So we're really talking humans underneath everything. So it's a human condition to bitch and moan about life and to try and make things better, at least for us in the short term, here and now. And some of us work the long term. I will never see these little acorns grow into oaks, but my great grandchildren will enjoy their shade. But whatever it is, and you put all those together, and it's the mix. It's the mix that's most exciting, because once you have, it's different when you're writing fiction because the creator is making all the decisions ultimately, unless a publisher is saying, "We want another book about, the talking pink snail, and we want you to kill off the teddy bear." Nobody wants that. Unless you've got that happening, then it's your players who are jumping in and they're pulling the levers you didn't want them to pull, and they're going to the right and down the alleyway instead of to the left towards the parade. You wanted them to go to the left to the parade and see all the gold and meet the king, and they want to go down the alleyway because no, we want to go over here. And they're going to bounce through your world in ways you didn't hope or intend for them to do so, and the world will be changed by whatever they do.
And that leads me to another point, because I find this a very difficult thing to do, and I wonder what the two of you think. I'm no good at writing fantasy settings in general because I draw too much, firstly of horror, and secondly of reality. So I'm a lot better at designing cities that are based in history around me, especially things I know very well. Like my hometown, that I turn into this whole Cthulhu setting thing. And one of the things I found very hard was, how am I going to make this a nasty enough place that won't put people off, and once you're reading it, say, why isn't everybody just going away from this hellhole? So because this is just absolutely horrific. How do you actually balance that? Because I found it really difficult to do.
Well, I just wanted to add one thing to what Ed was saying before we go into that, if I can. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course it is. This is your
So,
show.
so the so this complexity that you get when you write the way Ed is talking about for a game product, there are two ways that a game product is primarily used. One is that it's delved for ideas to run the game, right?
Mhm.
So that's why you have conflict and you have how you describe the city and all that stuff like that. But there's also a certain portion of the audience that's going to buy the book because they love D&D and they love Forgotten Realms or what have you. And they're going to read it, and they're going to read it as entertainment,
Mhm.
and they're never going to play with it. So when you write
Guilty.
a book for Dungeons and Dragons, you're writing for two audiences.
Hmm.
You're writing for the audience that's going to play with it, and you're writing for the audience that's going to read it as fiction.
Yes.
And you have to balance those two. That's something that's unusual, I think, in the gaming world, is that often people just want the story of the place. They'll go, "Oh, that's interesting," and then they'll close the book and put it on the shelf,
Mhm.
and they'll play something else. They'll play something different. They won't play in Waterdeep or Neverwinter or whatever, but they might say, "Oh, I remember that thing that was in the Waterdeep book. I'm going to pull that out." And oh, okay, I'm going to use Xanathar's Guild, but I'm going to put it over here or whatever. And the entire rest of that book was simply fiction that was entertaining to read.
No, that's indeed a fair enough, because I've done that. I mean, I do that with most of D&D books. I barely play D&D these days because I don't have enough time or a group to play it with. But I do devour the books because I absolutely love being well written. I mean, the prose of the description is definitely something that needs to be taken into account, and for the story to have some sort of life of itself and storyline, for the city to have a storyline. Otherwise, it's a bit. Um, I don't want to read a tourist, kind of booklet. Like when I visit Argentina or something like that. I want to read something a little bit more, I don't know, cohesive. Let's say. So how do you balance that? How do you get that sweet spot of the challenge and the attraction and making it interesting to the eye, without the need to making it interesting to the game, but also making it interesting to the gamer as well? It sounds like a very difficult, jigsaw puzzle to put together.
Well, there's two answers to that. One is the template that the publisher or editor puts in to make sure that you don't miss something, about the city. How is it taxed? Where are the guards? How many of them are, and where are their stables? Do they have the stables? All that stuff. Does the city have gates in walls? Do they close them at dusk? It's that sort of stuff. So make sure that you hit all the marks and don't miss something. There's that side of it. And then there's the other side of it, which is, and here I go, philosophical. What is the difference between humans and other animals? The difference is that humans tell each other stories, and they value these stories as not just ways to teach lessons, but ways to show us ourselves, to preserve history and tell us that's what it is to be a lumberjack or whatever. The story tells us. So the way around that is to make the way you strike that balance is to, as much as your editor will allow you with word count, tell little stories to do with everything. So if you come across a street that's got buildings with different colored roofs on it, say most of your city is tile roofed, which tells you something in and of itself. They're not boards, they're not thatch anymore, they're tiles. um, or cedar shakes or shingles or whatever, but they're mainly tiles. And there's one street with them all different colors. Why? What's the story behind that? Or you come across a street that's got beautiful mosaic patterns in the street because the tiles were laid with swirling curves and patterns. Why? Oh, there's a story behind that. So you tell a little story, and it might be one line. It was This street is crazy because it was laid out by a drunkard during a 3-day bender. It could, and that could be it. It could be a throwaway line where you don't tell us anything else about it. But it's vastly more interesting than a tourist guidebook pamphlet that said you will recognize this street because it's laid out in a crazy fashion. And you go, huh? And why? Tell me. See, we want to know. That's what it is to be human. So if you tell little stories like that all the time, you can turn around and give a real feel for the local population. Does the local population like its wine? Does it like to have parties at night? Do they have naps or siestas? Do they have fun time? Or are they hard industrious workers who are found dead at their workbenches having died of overwork? Or something in between. And all these little stories will tell us something about that. So it will tell you more about the local population, which allows a dungeon master or game master to improvise, as they're going to have to during a game because the players are going to do something strange. But a good setting book that describes any settlement will give the dungeon master enough to just improvise on the spot, in the same way that if you have a stage full of veteran Shakespearean actors and somebody dries, forgets their lines, and then starts improvising, goes off on a tangent, really good actors, you can't tell unless you have the play memorized because they improvise along with in the right style and they drag things back to where they have to be to end the scene and move on, and you may never know. Well, yeah, that's what the same tools you're giving to the storyteller so that the place, it will feel real rather than feeling like the actors galloped the wrong way while filming the gunfight scene and they're now going along behind the false fronts of the buildings, and there's a whole bunch of surprised crewmen who have cigarettes in their hands who are standing there going, what are you doing, as the cameramen come around the corner racing on a cart after all the, and they're going, you weren't supposed to. Oh. But you see, that'll never happen because your entire settlement, you'll have the tools to say, and you round the corner, and facing you is a statue of the Doge. And somebody has removed the Doge below the waist because one always should. They used a hammer to do it. They don't like the Doge. You can fight it. It's so easy to improvise once you have the local feeling in your head. And you do that by the little stories and things you tell about, do people whistle while they work? Do they throw things at each other? do they curse at the guy next door? That sort of thing.
And as a developmental editor, so what I thought about when he was talking about this strange street with the strange pattern in it, as a developmental editor, I want to turn up the volume on that.
Yeah.
And so I'll say, oh, it wasn't a drunkard.
Yeah.
This street was built by occultists, and they built several other streets in the city. And once they complete the final street in the middle of that diagram, the stars will be right, so to speak. But the thing is, to your question, though, I think that it's a matter of perspective. It's not. It's so we've probably all lived in an urban area, and we aren't aware of the serious problems, like the serious problems, and that we might be aware of it statistically. We might see it on the evening news or something like that. In a fantasy setting, people might be talking about, oh yeah, another person disappeared on Water Street 2 days ago. Did you hear about that? No, I didn't hear about that. Stuff like that. But that stuff points to things that could be monstrous, for example. So, but normal people, it's not like it's minus Morgul and everybody's an orc or a Nazgul. It's like
Mm.
it's although that could be a cool city. Um, uh, the, the the usual type of city, the citizenry is like us. They aren't aware of the the vile things that are going on in the seedier parts of the city or underground or wherever. So in the book that you publish for a game, though, the dungeon master needs to be aware of those
Mm.
things so you can run an adventure based on
Yeah.
those things. So something can pique the dungeon master's interest and say, "Oh, I'm going to follow that thread."
And you need to make sure to avoid that false front thingy. If you're talking about, minus Morgul and Nazgul and orcs, I as a designer saying, yeah, what's for dinner? And where does it come from? Yeah, are we cooking up goblins, or is whichever orc disagreed with a Nazgul, is he getting spitted and fried and put on a
all,
platter?
all
Where is
I know
food
is that meat's on the menu, boys.
Yeah. Yeah, but how does the daily life cycle work? Because you always have to think about that, even if it doesn't go in the written product. Even if you're doing a setting in a book where you're going to see it as in a fast action movie, say an Indiana Jones movie, okay, where the action's going to race through a location, and you're going to have a few shots at most to determine that, oh, this is the place where he's going to leap off his dying horse and steal another horse and ride on, from the horses tied up outside the inn because they're all in there drinking. Even if that's the only thing, you have to, in your own mind, you have to know how the circle of life works, life cycle in that setting. Where does the food come from? Where does dinner come from?
Well,
What is dinner? Do we
and
all
that's
go out in the field and eat grass?
and that's one of the reasons why I really like those. I really like city stat blocks because they're a summary of that. They can be a summary of that stuff in like a column of text
Mm.
on a page, and that can enable you as a dungeon master. You can just read that column of text. I'm even including stuff that some people think is pedantic and probably think is pedantic and ridiculous, like the percentage of the population. Like this city is 74% halfling. That actually matters
It matters a
to how
lot.
you
Mhm.
to describe how you describe the city. The city's primary export is gold. Oh, okay. Like,
Imports and exports.
yeah. So,
Yeah,
so
there are planners who define cities that way.
mhm.
There's a name of the city and its imports and exports. That's all they care about.
And that
but
leads me to
but
the next. Sorry, Chris. Go ahead.
but it also enables you as a dungeon master to say, well, there are wagons full of gold rolling out of the city. And the players might go, really? There are wagons full of gold rolling out of the city. Could change the entire campaign.
Absolutely, and that's the other thing that I wanted to talk about. What are you having for dinner? What are the resources? How much should the environment around the city or the possibility of obtaining what the city needs to thrive be taken into account at the time of creating the city? And how do you reflect that within the city itself? Because it's different if you have a city that's in the middle of the desert. Where are you going to get, dinner? Where are you going to get your fruit, your vegetables, your water? But if you are in the middle of a valley, how are you going to get your game? Is it just going to be agriculture around you, or how are you going to get what roads are there going to be for you to get whatever it is that you cannot get at the city? So how much should the environment influence how the city is born and how the city evolves in time?
It governs it. There are so many ruins across our planet of cities that were abandoned because of changing climate and so on. People couldn't live there anymore. So even though they built this vast stone city with tons of work to do it, they had to move. And all you have to do is look over any well-worn, mature European landscape, which is darn near all of them if you aren't high up in a mountain. any fortification that wasn't needed anymore, eventually, if it had been abandoned and wasn't guarded, the locals came with a cart and started stealing stones from it to make their cottage, So
Yeah,
you'll
there's a
look at
castle right up here on the hill
yeah,
where the Bailey Wall is gone
yeah,
because they took it all down into the village.
yeah,
Like,
yeah. And that is not only cool story, it makes the place feel real and lived in. And because it is real, it's a real thing. If you can't feed yourself, and this used to be the I recall, I'll just tell a tiny little story of being as a young student, being in a production of a play, and this was a bedroom farce set in England post Second World War, and it was all indoors in a stately home, with one exception. So they had to paint a backdrop of the fields outside. This is a vast estate, and there's one scene where they're taking off for a shooting party, so they're outdoors. So the guy had painted a beautiful backdrop, and he was very proud of it. He showed it off to the director, and the director looked at it and said, "It's beautiful. I love it. Now fix it." And the guy said, "Excuse me?" And he said, "Fix it." And he said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Our setting is post-war. That matters. It's in the story." He goes, "Yes." He says, "Well, by law, half of those fields should be cultivated at all times. You couldn't leave fields fallow like that. You've given us beautiful meadows. They look very nice, but half of them should be tilled, because England had learnt the hard way that it couldn't feed itself." And the head actor happened to be American, and he said, "What? That's an F of a lot of work for something that's going to be like just in the background." And he said, "The only people who will come to our play and really appreciate it are people of that age. They lived through it. They will know. They will notice, and they will know. Fix the backdrop." And he said, "What is this about? English food isn't thrilling. What is it about all this?" Said the American guy. And the British director looked at him with contempt and said, "You Americans, you still think security is guns. Security is being able to feed yourself." And he walked off. But you see, to him, he'd lived through starving post-war and rationing. So it mattered. And that is the thing. You have to get the details right so it feels right. And if you do that, you can actually get things wrong here, there, and everywhere, and people will forgive you, or it will be glossed past because it feels right.
well, and those little details also lead you to the problems that adventurers might have to deal with. Like, if the city can't feed itself, what is it doing? You know,
Yeah, yeah.
uh,
And in the case of London, you have to conquer half the planet and have ships of the line, because in order to maintain the standard of living for all these people, you got to grab stuff from everywhere else, because you can't, and all of these beautiful, well, the Roman aqueducts, you had to get water from one place to another. And they did it all over everywhere. If you didn't, they built reservoirs, they had canals. A lot of that was bringing water in.
yeah, and to take that British uh, ships of the line stuff and put it into fantasy, that's why the countryside could be rife with bandits. You know, there's not enough food.
Yeah.
People are looking for food. That could also be why this a bunch of the people in this city have decided to become raiders, and they're raiding across the border into a neighboring kingdom or
hmm
whatever. You know, it's
And for ships of the line in the real world, England was cutting down forests at a great rate. They cut their way right across Canada, to get timbers for the ships. And then, so you think, yeah, so what? Well, what it means is your city is going to be built differently, because you can no longer easily go and get timbers, and you can no longer easily go and get wood, scrub wood, to heat with. So now we're into, well, what are you going to use for heat? Oh, I guess we're taking camel dung and shoving it together and burning it every night. Oh, that's going to make the food taste great. And
or peat.
or yeah, and yeah, and I guess we're not going to build with primarily with wood. We're going to build a lot more with stone or adobe or whatever it is. You know, it affects everything.
That makes sense. Okay, let's go a little bit something a little bit more technical now, because we're talking about making cities for D&D. Now, D&D has, and depending on the world that you are in, of course, but D&D has in every setting, apart from Dark Sun, perhaps, a very specific cosmogony, a very specific theology, and a very specific magical setting and capabilities that have or could have the power of changing everything in ways that we cannot even imagine. I think, Chris, you and I maybe talked about this in Twitter once, about why would there be anything similar to poverty or starvation in a world where you can create a spell and suddenly you have a panacea of food coming out of anywhere and everywhere. Why would
The
there
answer,
be?
Paco. The answer, Paco, is expensive consumable material components.
Yeah, there is a cost. Magic,
But how?
magic has a cost.
But
Yeah.
how do you stop yourself from doing all those things? Because as far as I'm concerned, if I had to design a D&D world, anybody who goes to any kind of religious service once a week would be able to cast a cantrip on Sundays. Because why would the gods only favor those who become cleric? Why wouldn't the devotion of somebody who is not a cleric but still is a devout believer and follower not get any kind of favor out of it? So that would be my approach. And my approach would be, well, why wouldn't everybody send their kids to wizardry school, to call it somehow, so they can learn to make very simple cantrips, just so their life is slightly easier? Why wouldn't everybody learn to how, a cure light wounds, for instance?
You
Yeah.
kind of
How do
just
you
described
stop
Whole
yourself?
Rua, though.
Yeah.
You kind of just described Whole Rua in the Forgotten Realms.
Yeah. And one of the things I built into the realms, and because it's built into the D&D game before I was designing for D&D. I mean, the realms is older than D&D, but the D&D design is magic has a cost. Everything costs, as Chris just said. And the game actually, because it focuses on adventuring and your player character, who is supposed to be one of these exceptional people, it gives us a skewed view of how easy it is to get access to magic. As in, well, why is anybody who was born, say, with a deformity, why are they, when we've got spells that can just fix that? Well, it's because not everybody can afford the spell or get to the person who can cast it or give that caster something to make it worth their while. And we tend to think that magic is like air, it's endless, until we're down a coal mine and discover that air isn't endless. And that's the thing. The game is predicated on the fact that there isn't enough to go around. It may not say it, may not shout it in every word of every page of the rule book, but your player characters are exceptional. They are the exception, not the rule. That's how they can stand out. I would submit to you that your average gamer sitting at the table would have a very, very, very rude shock if they were playing in a setting where the dungeon master was running it like their characters were very minor cogs and everybody was an adventurer, most of them with years more experience and much higher levels and so on than the player characters. So would elbow them aside and, hey, I'm the big cheese here, and it would be a very different play experience. So yeah, I think the thing is, we know going in that there's a cost to magic. Now, in the case of this thing you just cited, why wouldn't everybody send their kid off to wizarding school and so on? Well, in the realms, I set it up that only certain people are born with the gift to wield the art, as in arcane magic, the ability, either innate like sorcerers, in the game, D&D calls them sorcerers, who can just sort of go, if I do this and I get really angry, wah, out comes the fire, or oh, if all I have to do is follow this very complicated procedure in this book and gather a tongue of bat and some sulfur, and then I can do this, and fire will come out. Or I pray to the deity, and fire will come out. Except, what do you think the god of fire feels like that? I don't want just anybody who doesn't worship me directly calling forth fire. So, if I hear that somebody over there in that kingdom is calling fire, and somebody over there, I will look inside their minds. What are they going to use it for? No, I don't like them. No fire for you. So they work the spell and nothing happens. Or a flaming hand comes up and does this in the air in front of them. So there is a cost.
Okay, that's a fair enough indeed. By the way, Google is just telling us we have 10 minutes, which is highly annoying. Chris, you were about to say something, I believe?
Well, I think that you can build the opposite, though. You could remove the costs of magic, and you could explore the, I don't want to use the word realistic, the logical outcomes of that. Like, it could be really cool to have a setting where a lot of people do go to wizarding school, and it could be really cool to have a setting where the worshippers of specific deities get a cantrip that they can keep for a week. Everybody's going around going light, 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 light.
Oh, not again.
And stuff like that. But when I said there's a cost to magic, though, one of the things I was referring to is that, let's use Raised Dead as an example. Raised Dead in D&D consumes a 5,000 gold piece diamond. If I'm remembering correctly, one of those spells consumes it's like 500, 1,000, 5,000, or something like that. Anyway, but for players and their characters, 500 gold piece, a 5,000 gold piece, a 1,000 gold piece diamond. By the time they're dealing with the idea that they might raise the dead, that's something that they can afford. But for a dock worker in Waterdeep, a 5,000 gold piece diamond is utterly out of reach, income-wise. And it's not like the priest that can actually cast the Raised Dead spell is saying, I'm not going to cast the spell for you. The priest is saying, I literally can't, because I don't have a 5,000 gold piece diamond. Do you? And the dock worker says, no, I don't. But the 17th level fighter says, hey, we found one of those the other day. I mean, that's a conceit in the game too. I mean,
yeah.
Part of it is that it is a game, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean,
but you can make all those changes. You just have to think through how they affect society. If everybody's using light cantrips all week, somebody's going to say, so you can work through the night now. You just have to think about how it'll change society.
That is actually a very, very good point indeed. Okay, because we are running out of time, unfortunately, which is on one hand annoying, on the other hand convenient, because otherwise I could probably be here for another 4 hours talking.
That's what we do.
It would be very, very easy. Okay, Ed, we started with what should you consider when making a city. Now, give me at least 2 or 3 points that should definitely avoid when creating a city. We've gone over what to do. Now, what not to do.
Don't start with a huge, long timeline.
Okay.
And then this happened, and then this happened, because it's a time sink. Eventually, you're going to have a timeline, but it should grow out of your story needs rather than be the place you start. The only reason to have a timeline is if your city is the burial place of a long line of kings, and you want to lay out how they were all ordered. Which is, by the way, a very nice way of doing a history of a kingdom, if it's a kingdom. Other than that, avoid that. The other thing is, unless your campaign is all as Chainmail was, a sand table military campaign where it's all you're doing is fighting battles, which is what Greyhawk grew out of. So the original Greyhawk release is, here's a kingdom. Here's how many troops they can field to get butchered in this battle. That's all you ever found out about and here's its heraldry, so you know what to paint on the banners. Go out and die. You don't want to start there, okay? It doesn't matter how many troops can be mustered unless they're all trying to live in the city and you're trying to feed them, okay? So don't go those two things. And don't go the urban planning unless you have somehow come up with a setting where there is firm urban planning, like a temple city or an absolute tyrant who's really good at it, because all of the other cities and all of the interesting cities just grew. They may have urban planning imposed upon them by powerful, strong rulers, but they started out just growing that way, and they're way more interesting. So those would be the three things to avoid.
I love that. Chris, what about you? What things do you think people should avoid?
I think that overwhelming detail altogether. And what I mean by that is start with the things that you need. So Ed said, your timelines are going to develop. Start with the elements in the city that you need and let the setting grow from there. Like the characters come back to the city and they are looking for an ironmonger. Well, that's when you need to know where the ironmongers are, kind of. So if you as a dungeon master are creating a city, then you just let it grow organically as your players interact with it. We can't do that as designers, though. We have to. I mean, we're publishing a product, right? And so it needs to be more expansive than that. So, but I would say any overwhelming detail, any detail that is something that you won't need in your next adventure or your next few adventures. Like if the characters are from a certain part of the city, you might just start with that neighborhood and the demographics of the city, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. Makes perfect sense. Gentlemen, thank you both very much. Ed, thank you very much indeed for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank
This
you,
was
Ed.
fun. This was fun.
It was amazing. I hope we can do it again with other things, because I'd love to talk to you about, making magical items and creatures and God knows what. So it would be great to have you back sometime. So
sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Much. This was fun. I love doing these sort of things where we just talk.
Yeah, it's super fun.
And then we run out of time, of course.
Yeah, it is,
and then we have to order another round to drink it.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, talk to you very, very soon.
Bye-bye, guys.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye. This was great.